everyone, welcome to this week's ITS seminar. This is the penultimate seminar of the quarter, which means we've got one more after this, and then we break for summer. So I am delighted to introduce today's speaker, Celeste Chavis, who is an associate professor in the Transportation and Urban Infrastructure Studies program at Morgan State University, which is in the city of Baltimore, Maryland. And I am delighted that she was willing to make the trip to come out here. She did her PhD at UC Berkeley, so she has some local ties as well. But the topic for today, this issue of food deserts, I feel like this is bringing together everything I've been talking about this quarter, whether it's in my undergraduate urban planning class, where I've got a number of students who are looking at food deserts for their final assignment, or whether it's my graduate transportation planning class, where I started out by talking about accessibility as really kind of the core of everything we're doing there. And then also this equity and transport justice seminar that some of our students got going this quarter. So this topic just really brings together all of those different threads. So I am really looking forward to this talk, and please join me in welcoming Celeste.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So this is very local. Let me talk a little bit about what Morgan State is. So Morgan State is a historically black college and university in Baltimore, Maryland. Kind of our mission is to be an urban research institution where we really try to tackle local community-based problems, and so this research topic kind of falls under that umbrella. So just a little bit about, everybody knows what a food desert is, but it's an area which is difficult to buy healthy foods, particularly fresh produce, and quality fresh food at an affordable price. And Baltimore is geographically a very segregated city, where it's segregated across income lines as well as racial lines. And that, coupled with some of the economics of enticing a grocery store into an area, has really created these isolated food desert areas in the city. So I'm going to talk about kind of my motivation behind this study and how I got into this work. It's a little bit non-traditional for a person in the transportation engineering space to do this sort of study. So when I was looking at a lot of the food desert literature, there's a lot of it. A lot of it's focused from the health point of view. There's also some aspects from land use. And one of the things that's always cited is how vehicle ownership is so important to assessing quality foods. And so there's been a wealth of literature pertaining to food desert studies, some that look at socioeconomic differences when it comes to your access to fresh foods. As we know, lower income neighborhoods have fewer healthy food options. Also, we look at the cost of food by geographic areas. So in a lot of areas where you lack grocery stores, there's a reliance on convenience stores. And of course, the same food at a convenience store is going to be priced higher than that of your large-scale grocery stores. And this food desert issue isn't necessarily just an urban issue. You also see some of the same problems with your rural areas as well. And so along similar lines, both inner city and rural areas tend to find that food choices are limited in both type of food as well as the number of food outlets. And as I said before, when you are shopping at your non-chain stores, you're looking at a 10 to 40% increase in price versus your chain locations. And of course, quality of food is much better at your grocery stores compared to your smaller neighborhood stores. And this, of course, has a huge impact on your health and obesity rates, and it's been linked that people who live in these food void areas have higher obesity rates and have other health implications. And then, of course, there's some literature about accessibility in stores. So some have looked at the number and quantity of stores based on geographic area. It's been found that there's fewer stores, of course, in your lower income areas. And this, of course, requires for longer travel distances. And so I began looking at the different measures of a food desert. And when you look at how people measure, like, oh, this area is a food desert, you get very different geographic areas depending on how you measure it. So that was kind of like the motivation. But what we found is that regardless of how people are measuring it, there's really these kind of three core indicators for what is a food desert. One being income, second is your distance to your nearest supermarket, and of course, third is vehicle ownership. And so these are the three things that we're looking closely at in this study. You guys can also interrupt me for questions. There's no need to wait to the end. I'm a professor, so I don't mind. I actually prefer if I'm not the only one talking, so please. I know, I'll cut it off if it's looking like too much, but feel free to ask questions as we go. And so what we'll be looking at is kind of two definitions of food deserts for this study. One is the USDA definition of what a food desert is. So this we're kind of looking at as the national definition for a food desert. And then the local one that has been done in partnership with Baltimore City and Johns Hopkins University. So this just shows you the city of Baltimore. This is the area that is deemed a food desert according to the USDA's definition of a food desert. So you can see a very large portion of Baltimore City is deemed a food desert. This one is looking at the half-mile definition. So USDA actually has technically 4 food desert definitions. We looked at 3 that were pertinent to an urban area. And so it is based on your income level. So a low income area is defined as one with which the poverty rate is greater than or equal to 20%, or the median income is less than 80% of the statewide median income, or less than 80% of the metropolitan area income. So a census tract has to be both low income and low access, where low access is defined as 500 or more people in a census tract, or 33% of the population that lives more than half a mile from a supermarket. So of course, there's going to be most places you don't have a supermarket every half a mile. So you can see how much of the city is deemed a food desert based on this half-mile definition. They also relaxed the half mile to 1 mile, and you can see what areas are a food desert based on the USDA 1 mile definition.
Just a good question about what the USDA qualified as a supermarket. Like, obviously, I'm sure that like places like in the East and other Stop and Shop, what about like Whole Foods or Trader Joe's? Like, where does that line get drawn?
So yeah, so Whole Foods would be count. Even your discount ones like your Aldi's, your Save-A-Lots are considered supermarkets. Anything that involves a membership, like your Sam's Clubs, those are not considered in the definition, like your military commissaries. So it has to be open to the public, and they have like a criteria that a certain percent of your merchandise has to be food related. So it's most large-scale supermarkets.
Is there a minimum size of store?
There is. I can't remember offhand what that threshold is. Yes, we'll talk about that too. So that's one of the things Baltimore City did with their metric. They incorporated residential land use into their definition. And you'll be able to see kind of where that cuts out some of the areas that are defined as a food desert. Their third indicator is low vehicle access. Let me move this from my hair. Okay. So their third definition, hopefully they can still hear me, is low vehicle access. And that's just based on at least 100 households being more than half a mile from the nearest supermarket and not having access to a vehicle. And you can see that area in yellow. So a huge part of the city. You'll also notice there's kind of these stark lines. This is one of the key dividing streets in Baltimore going north through the city. You have a very affluent area here. As soon as you cross this street, Greenmount York Road, the demographics change. So that's some of the interesting aspects of Baltimore. So this is the city's definition. You can see it's a lot more fragmented because they do take into account land use. So they're only looking at areas that have residential land use. And then they also look at the quality of food in the area. So looking at the average, what they call healthy food availability index, where they actually went around and surveyed the types of foods in your supermarkets as well as your corner stores. Very intensive effort there. It's based on median income being less than or equal to our 185% of the federal poverty level, which is around 40,000. Vehicle availability. So census tract, where 30% or more of households do not have access to a vehicle. So this is kind of set at the city average threshold. And then also based on distance to the supermarket, where they looked at a quarter of a mile for this. You can see that the distance that they used was Euclidean distance. You can kind of see some of those circles where there's actual supermarkets located. But those are the areas that's defined. So one of the areas that the city is really interested in is this West Baltimore area and looking at how to provide access to grocery stores in that area. And this is just comparing the areas with the three definitions. So the colors are the USDA definition, and then the hash areas is the city accepted food desert metric. And you can see that there's some overlap between those food desert measurements, but you really are getting drastically different areas for what's a food desert. And there's several other metrics besides this out there, but these were the two that we chose, since one is the one the city uses and another one is a nationally accepted measure. And so this is kind of like the motivation for why we did this study. So we were curious to say, okay, should we use a quarter of a mile, half mile, 1 mile? And is there maybe a better way of defining what a food desert is? I have to admit we haven't quite came to the full answer because it's still an in-progress study, but we have gotten some really good insights as to kind of the weight of these three indicators and that sort of thing. So our study, kind of the core things that we were interested in are what are the best indicators, kind of what are those income thresholds, those distance to the supermarket thresholds. We were also curious because it kind of looked like it was just basically, do you own a vehicle or do you walk, with the way the food desert metrics were set up. So we were curious to look at, well, what's the effect of other modes of transport when it comes to getting to and from the grocery store? And then more along those lines, what's the role of kind of your alternative forms of transport as well as food delivery when it comes to food? Does it change with seasons in terms of grocery access? We did ask a question, mode choice. We asked a question about weather affecting your mode choice. A few people said yes, but generally no. And what you'll see is there's a reliance on automobile to get to the grocery store, whether you own a vehicle or not. So our survey kind of looked at these 4 measures of accessibility. We looked at how often you're going to the grocery store, so the number of trips per month, the number of different grocery stores, so we think that choice is important. So yes, you may have access to a grocery store, but are you able to go to different grocery stores to meet your needs? Along those lines, are you shopping at your nearest grocery store? This was a self-reported yes or no. We're in the process of actually verifying that using their home location and their preferred store locations. And then the last one was looking at the quality of food at the store, so looking at that healthy food availability index with the stores that they chose as their preferred location. So survey, we asked various social demographic information, household size, income, mode availability, mode choice for going to the grocery store. We did ask for home location, just the nearest intersection We asked for their preferred grocery stores, so which one do they go to most often, and their grocery shopping habits. So we got about 500 responses, a mix of online and in person. Probably as most of you know from survey design, a lot of our online respondents tended to lean more affluent, so we kind of got a set part of the city that way. We did in-person surveys at various grocery stores across the city so that we can get a mix of geographic areas as well as demographics. So through that process combined, we had about 500 responses. Yes, so this was actually a supplemental survey that was done by one of my undergraduates through her senior project. So in Baltimore, we have a big informal taxi industry. So this was like Uber before Uber, essentially, where people use their own cars to drive people around. So in Baltimore, you'll see them lined up at a lot of grocery stores. And they help people with their bags, they drop you off at your home. So it's just an informal taxi industry. So we were actually able to interview about 13 drivers, which is hard to do because it's technically an illegal economy. But Morgan is such a kind of anchor in Baltimore that my student with her Morgan shirt and being young, they're actually very open. Like some of them called their other drivers that they knew so they could get the survey and that sort of thing. So there were some really interesting insights, particularly about the trade-off between these informal taxis and now that we have Uber and Lyft and your TNCs and kind of what their market segments are. So of course, this shifted a little bit. Lots of data cleaning involved in this process. So we kind of had to remove based on not providing zip codes, people who took the survey even though they didn't live in Baltimore City, those sort of things. So we had about 516 surveys with which we were able to geocode 447 for their home location, 454 we could identify their preferred stores, and about 400 of those we could identify both their home and store locations. This is just general demographics of our survey sample. So the first one is employment. Roughly half were full-time employed. Then you see a mix all the way from unemployed, students, retirees for our survey. Here is race. This is pretty reflective of Baltimore. It's about 2/3 Black in the city. And then income, our income range all the way from 100,000 at the high end, and then you can see less than 20,000 and then working your way around. Apologize for the order. And then a fairly nice mix of ages for our survey responses. Yeah, I think income, we may have a bit more at the less than 20,000 level than Baltimore City. The age demographic, I think, is pretty similar. But I think maybe income may be the only one that's not fully aligned. Sorry, how much is it? So I didn't look at that in terms of like kind of translating the health implications to a monetary amount. I did not look at that for this study just because health wasn't really the focus. I did look at what the financial burden of transporting to the grocery store is. And we found that if you don't have a car and you're taking like the taxis and informal taxis, you're spending roughly about $10 to $15 each way to go to the store. And so that's a very high expense if you think about going to the grocery store. You're not going to make small trips at that expense. And then marital status, education. It's probably a little bit higher in terms of the college educated threshold at the graduate degree level than the city average. So here's just a map of where people lived who responded to our survey. Based on the food desert metrics that we were looking at, 31% lived in the city-located food priority areas, as they call them. They prefer that term over food deserts. About 45% lived in the USDA based on the half-mile definition, only 6 when you use the 1-mile definition. And then based on vehicle access, about a third of our sample lived in a USDA food desert based on vehicle access. A little bit about grocery stores in Baltimore. So this is the location of your grocery stores across the city. So we looked at all stores within Baltimore as well as those within 2 miles of Baltimore. A lot of studies we found kind of focus just on the stores that reside in the city, but it's very easy to cross geographic lines. So we expanded it out to look at surrounding grocery stores as well. So you do see grocery stores mixed across the city. The quality of the stores is a little bit varied, right? So like in the west side, you see a reliance on Save-A-Lot, which is one of your more discount grocery stores. Your affluent stores like your Mom's Organic Grocery Store, your Whole Foods are kind of in this more affluent area of the city. So you see quite a few going north and then along our major northeast and northwest roads. And then we also included any other store with which our survey respondents say that they primarily shop at, which was an additional 4 stores. We used the Maryland Food Environment List to create this database of stores and then verify, because there have been some closings and openings since that was created. And this is just overlapping the city's food desert areas with the grocery store locations. So once again, you can see kind of that West Baltimore area, which is one of the areas of priority. And there's also another major area to the northeast as well. South Baltimore, too, sometimes has some transportation difficulties as well. And the waterway doesn't help in that with the way a lot of the public transportation is arranged around the harbor. So our survey asked what other stores do you shop at? So they weren't limited to just picking supermarkets. So there were some people who picked like your Walmarts as your primary store you shop at for groceries. So we did just kind of survey like where some of your other stores are across the area, like your Walmarts, your Targets, and so forth. But they really weren't selected too often as your main shopping location. And this is just to kind of compare. So this is the list of a lot of your smaller grocery stores and corner stores in the area. You can kind of see they're concentrated in some of the areas that have fewer grocery stores. They're kind of inversely related. And this is just kind of looking at where your grocery stores are in the black dots versus where you see a prevalence of your convenience stores and corner stores. So this central part here is kind of your higher density area. Downtown is here. So this is your older, smaller grid network area. So you see more of those convenience stores. When you move to the outskirts, it's kind of more residential in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. I haven't looked officially, but I was doing a study in Jacksonville similar. I think it may be more dense just because it's a very small and densely populated East Coast city. But in terms of the relative amounts of convenience stores based on income level and where you see grocery stores, it follows very similar trends.
I think there are a lot more of them than we realize.
Yes.
You start looking and then you see them everywhere.
And yeah. And so yeah, this is one of your old East Coast cities. So it's a very walkable part of town where you see this real dense network.
But that includes mom and pops as well as 7-Eleven?
Yep. Mm-hmm. So a lot of 7-Elevens, your mom and pops, a lot of the stores that accept EBT and SNAP was also used to aggregate that set. So we asked, where do you primarily shop? So there were about 25 people listed, like your superstores, like your Walmart superstore, as where they primarily shop. for groceries. 13 people did list like your Costco's and Sam's and Walmart's. 2 people mentioned the farmers markets. And then you do see a few very small sample are saying like you're kind of your local small grocers. And unfortunately, one person said Family Dollar is where they primarily shop at. And this is just looking at the stores that were selected as their primary grocery store, where the size of the circle represents more responses who chose that grocery store. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they were very interested. So we got approval, actually, to do our survey at grocery stores, and part of the way we motivated it was 2 primary things. 1, saying we would share the results with them, and 2, we gave respondents gift cards for that particular grocery store, so they then spent money back at that store. So that was kind of the 2 ways that we were able to let us do that at their stores. So I haven't shared it with them yet because we're still finalizing everything. But a lot of what we got, they can actually get from your rewards cards when you swipe your rewards card. So I don't know, in terms of demographics, they probably have a lot of that. But maybe in terms of like the actual transportation patterns and that sort of thing would be new to them. So then we just looked at, just visually right now, where people live versus where they go for their primary grocery shopping trips. So the star is where the grocery store is located. The black dots is the home location. And so just shows kind of a sampling of different stores. So Food Depot is on that west side where they have limited access. It's a lower cost, affordable chain. This Shoppers is a major chain on the East Coast, and this is located at a transit hub. So we were kind of curious to see if the fact that it was at a transit hub will we get people from further out and not so much. It still tends to be more locals who are shopping at that Shoppers. Safeway, this is kind of in the central part of the city where you have a lot of mixed incomes nearby that store. And you can see where people are coming from to shop there. Giant, this is a pretty affluent area of town. Save-A-Lot is a affordable brand store, very local. A lot of people live very close to that store. This Buy Right was interesting. This is on the northeast. It's a very residential part of town. There's not a lot of grocery store options on that part of town, so you see that it kind of takes a lot of the demographic in that area for grocery store shopping. Mom's is an organic store. So all these people kind of live in the affluent area of the city. There's a kind of a colloquial term for Baltimore where they say we have the white L and the black butterfly in the city. And that basically is about the fact that your higher income affluent areas go north through the city and then a little bit eastward. So that's the white L. And then the black butterfly, meaning all the surrounding areas, is where you see a lot more of your minority populations there. And so you can kind of see that people who are shopping at that organic store do largely live in that affluent spine of the city. Save-A-Lot, east side here, another location where there's a lot of food deserts, very local. And then Walmart, chose that one to see what the role of your big box. And you can see people came from all over to shop at that Walmart. So a much different pattern with your superstores. All right, so getting back to kind of those measures of accessibility and your food desert metrics. So we're basically going to just kind of drill down on those 4 measures and looking at the relationship between distance, income, and vehicle access. So one of the really interesting things is about half of our sample said, no, we don't shop at the store that's closest to our home. And we found that interesting because so many of the food desert measures are based on how close you are to your nearest grocery store. but people want choices, and maybe the store closest to them is not the one that they prefer to shop at. And so we saw this for about half our people said they do not shop at the nearest store. However, looking at metrics based on your home location is valid. About 87% said that their shopping does originate from their residence. About 12% say they do their shopping coming from work. So just reminding you of our 4 measures and the 3 indicators that we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to break down each of the 4. So the first one was asking people, do they shop at their nearest store? On the left, we're just breaking it down based on if you own a vehicle or not. And so you can see slightly more people who do not own a vehicle shop at the store that's closest to their house. We decided to look at the different kind of distance breakdowns that we've been seeing in most of your food desert literature. Like if you have a store within a quarter mile, all the way up to something more than a mile from your home. As you see, there's no real relationship between if you shop at your nearest store, even if you have a store within a quarter of a mile to you, it's not much different than your other distances. Yes, it was, I think about a third. I'll have it on another one, but I think it's about a third of our sample. And this is looking at income. So you see that the 100,000 is a bit of an anomaly where you have a lot more people who are shopping at their nearest store. But you can kind of see that the people who say yes kind of decreases with income. So as you have more money, you're able to kind of diversify where you're shopping at. And so what we did right now is just kind of look at the weights and the level of influence of these variables. So we did a CHAD decision tree looking at what is important, where we tested vehicle ownership, those 4 distance thresholds, as well as income levels. And what we found here is looking at shopping at the nearest store. This was self-reported, so DK is don't know, they weren't sure. No and yes. And so income at the $35,000 level was the only significantly influencing variable, where you see that those with incomes less than $35K, 65% of the sample said that they would shop at the nearest grocery store. Those who are over that, it was about 44%. So you see that that 35,000, there's a significant difference between shopping at your nearest store. And then we also just looked at, okay, of the 3 food desert metrics, we didn't include the 1 mile because only 6 people lived in a USDA food desert based on 1 mile, so didn't look at that one. But based on these 3 food desert metrics, can we say that if you live in what is defined as a food desert, do we see any difference in the percent that are shopping at their nearest store? And only the Hopkins definition was there a significant difference with shopping at your nearest store. So looking at frequency of grocery trips. Same thing looking at vehicle ownership. So those who don't own a vehicle are shopping about 1 less trip per month than those who own a vehicle on average. We did break it down by distance to the store. Not much there. You see it is increasing as you live further, but maybe that's because you're walking versus driving. I'm not really clear about that. And then here by income, where once again that 100,000 level just is an anomaly when it comes to number of trips. So we see it jumps up to about 6 trips per month. And I didn't drill down to look at the number of workers in your household at that level, but there may be some things about if you have high income with multiple earners or not, and if you have people who are stay at home and that sort of thing. And then we did break down and ask actually how often do you buy certain types of items of food as opposed to just asking about going to the grocery store. So as expected, produce, people are buying a lot more often, 4 more times a month compared to like your non-perishable items, your frozen food, things that last a long time. So this is kind of important because if you're limiting your trips, it's really like stuff like produce and stuff that spoils that's going to be absent or limited in your diet. And this is breaking it down by vehicle ownership again, how frequently you go to the grocery store. And this was looking just at produce, sorry. I broke down produce by itself just because that's so important for a healthy diet. And you can see huge differences in how often you're buying produce based on if you own a vehicle or not. And then here's the decision tree for how often you're shopping. So the first node, which is the most important variable for how often you're shopping, is vehicle ownership. So if you own a vehicle, you can see that on average you're shopping about 5 times. If you don't own a vehicle, about 3.7. And you can see, so 200 out of 500 did not own a vehicle. And then based on if you own a vehicle, we see significant differences if your income is above that $100,000 mark. Where people who are above the $100,000 mark are shopping a lot more often than those who are below a household income of $100K. And for this one, USDA vehicle access was the only one that produced significant differences, which is kind of aligned with what we just saw with the decision tree, that vehicle access was the dominant predictor for frequency of being able to go to the grocery store. So now looking at the number of different grocery stores that you go to, so if you travel to more than one store, first separated by vehicle ownership. So most people are going to about 2 to 3 stores on both ends, but you can see a little bit more are saying 2 stores if you don't own a vehicle. Pretty balanced between 2 and 3 stores for those who own vehicles. Distance, no real trends looking at your distance to the nearest store. And this one is by household income. So you can see particularly at the less than 20,000 mark, they're really only going to 1 or 2 stores for most of their grocery shopping. Kind of as you go further along the income threshold, you see more diversity with 2 and 3 stores and a little bit more people who are going to 4 or more different stores for their grocery shopping. So for the number of stores that you are going to, that 35,000 income threshold once again became significant, where if you are above 35,000 on average, 2.7 different stores, so whereas it's a little bit lower at 2.3 if you're less than 35K for your household income. So for the difference in stores, vehicle ownership wasn't a factor. It's really your income that looked at the number of different stores that you traveled at. And none of the 3 food desert measures were significant, which makes sense because they don't measure how many different stores you're going to. It's all based on where the closest store is to you. And then lastly, we looked at the type of store. So at first it was type of store, but we ended up using the Healthy Food Availability Index for this. So the range is kind of small. It's really only from like 23 to 28 for your supermarkets with that index. So you're not going to see much variation in the numbers here. But generally speaking, those with a vehicle go to stores that have a slightly higher Healthy Food Availability Index. And then you can see the interesting part is quality does seem to go up as you're further away from the nearest store, which may be because if you have to drive anyway, you're going to go ahead and decide to drive to a store that has the quality of items that you want. And this is by income. As you would expect, as income goes up, you see higher quality of items as well. Higher quality of items at the grocery store you're shopping at. Yes? We didn't. And that was just mostly due to time and resource requirements. We didn't want to do any surveys at the stores, so we used what was already provided. And this is just kind of showing you kind of the correlation between store location and just the general income of the city. So this is using census data. So this is where you can see in the darker colors you have higher income and kind of how segmented the city is. So like your organic store, your Whole Foods, you see that they are located in these more affluent areas. There is some correlation to kind of your high quality organic food versus how close it is to you based on income. So we would expect to see that ties. Like your Save-A-Lot, your lower income, your Price Right, you notice that where they're located and so forth. So looking at the decision tree for quality of stores, so income was the most important of the indicators. So first was if you were below 20,000, and you can see the predicted quality if you are below 20,000, and then also if you are above the 75,000 mark, so you have your two extremes there. And then for your middle income levels between 20,000 and 75,000, that's when vehicle ownership plays a part in terms of the quality of your stores. And then we see that if you own a vehicle, slightly higher quality than those who don't own a vehicle there. So income was first, followed by vehicle access. And for this one, all of them were significant for predicting the quality of the store. With the Coors Hopkins, there's a star because it directly uses the Healthy Food Availability Index, so you can kind of take that with a grain of salt because it's part of the metric. So that was kind of how we're trying to drill down on food desert definition. Our ultimate goal is to kind of recommend maybe what should be used, like what are those cutoff points for the city. Unfortunately, our income brackets didn't exactly align with the city. They cut off at 45,000, but it appears that 45 was a little bit high, and that closer to 35, maybe more of a better income level than what you see. And then the whole nearest grocery store aspect was never significant in any of the measures of accessibility. And so to us, we're not really sure if there should be much weight put to that. Because really, what people are using the nearest grocery store is just to kind of subtract out an area that is a food desert and just saying, okay, you live close enough to a store so you don't count in that small quarter mile or half mile from the store. So then just to drill down a little bit on mode choice and alternative food delivery, since that was also kind of another component of the study. How am I doing on time? So we asked, what modes did you take in the last month to the grocery store? So selecting all that you have taken in the last month. The blue are people who don't own a vehicle. Orange are people who do own a vehicle. So non-motorized, aka really walking in Baltimore, there was maybe like 3 people in our whole sample who said biking. So when I say non-motorized, it's really walking. You can see few people do walk. And that, I think, is really just convenience of where you live to the store. Not much difference between those who own a vehicle and those who don't. Of course, those who don't own a vehicle are going to be paying for transport. So the hired vehicle includes taxis, your Ubers, and we also combine it with the borrow a vehicle. So maybe like you're taking a family member's car and so forth to the store. Transit, not really utilized. Of course, a few more who don't own a vehicle are taking transit. We did find that more people were more likely to say they take transit to the store and not on the return trip, which makes sense because you have bags, so you don't necessarily want to carry all those bags back with you, as well as the long travel times if you have perishable items, that sort of thing. And then, of course, so the personal vehicle, there should be known for people who don't own a vehicle, but I think they kind of confuse like borrowing a vehicle with actually using your own vehicle. So I assume that they borrowed the vehicle, but for clarity, I kept it separate. Exactly. So I'm not really sure on that. So this is like your error. 11 people who are a little little confused on what I meant, which is always a survey designer's fault, so I'll take the blame. Just looked at maximum travel time that they were willing to spend to get to the store by various modes. So this was kind of drilling down, like if there is a way of getting to the store maybe by transit, is that an option? How long are they willing to spend traveling by the different modes? So really that kind of 20-minute threshold seems to be about the limit to how long they're willing to spend, whether it be walking, in the car, to get to the grocery store. You see for transit, more people are willing to say a little bit more time, like 30 minutes plus. Biking, they're like, it doesn't matter what that limit is, I'm not going to bike to the grocery store. Huge number here, as well as transit. They're like, it doesn't matter how close it is, I'm not going to take the bus to the grocery store. There is rail, but most of the city is bus transport. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we're in the process of doing is looking at the people who did say yes, that they take transit to the store, and actually using the GTFS feed, looking at what their trip would be. So far, they're all one-seat rides that we've seen. But yeah, that's a good point. There is, but we assume that your drive time is the same whether you're driving or you're paying for it. So yeah, that's part of that. So the hack, just a little about the hack driver survey. It was an interesting kind of side component of the study. So interviewed 13 drivers at various grocery stores across the city. The demographic of the drivers, there was 2 female drivers, 11 male drivers. Their ages range from like 27 to 79. It was kind of interesting. Some of the younger people are starting to incorporate like Cash App, some modern things, whereas some of the older drivers, like you pay cash, very old school in their ways. And then half of them said that this is their main occupation. So this was kind of important for the city too, because they're trying to look at, is it possible to kind of use like TNCs, like Lyft and Uber, to kind of fill these gaps, but also knowing that this is actually a huge income stream for people in the city. And so we're not trying to kill an industry, even though it's on the fringes of legality in Baltimore. So we asked them about like what are some of the trends that they see with the people that they are picking up. So Friday and Saturday are their busiest days. They do see a peak in the number of customers at the first week of the month. They say that they are different than your TNCs, whereas they're actually providing a service. So they will help you with your bags. They'll carry your bags into the house. For some of your elderly customers, they will actually just take the grocery list and do the shopping for them. So they really like have personal relationships a lot of times with the people they're serving. They tend to have kind of two different structures. So you have the ones who will get picked up from their house, brought to the grocery store, they'll wait and then return them, so a round trip service. And then you'll also have the ones who will just take people home on the return trip. And so they kind of just line up in your regular taxi queue, and it's first come, first serve when people leave, and they need you just for the return trip. They say it's usually about $5 to $10 each way. The fare structure isn't really formalized, but it's like a generally accepted distance-based fare structure. They said that they haven't found that TNCs have had a huge impact on their business, which I was kind of surprised by. And they said that most of their customers are within a 10-minute drive of the store, which in Baltimore you can really get, when there's not traffic, you can get across most of the city in 30 to 40 minutes. So that makes sense. Majority of their customers, about 75%, are female. And when they're doing these shopping trips, they're doing very large shopping trips. They say most times they have about 15 to 30 bags. So if you're spending money to get to the grocery store, this is for your major shopping trip. Yes.
Was there any indication that they gave as to why they were the 3/4 of the customers female? Like, do you have an idea why that might be?
I just think it's who's doing the shopping trips in the household. We haven't progressed that much yet. So yeah, I think it's mostly just who's doing the shopping. No. So hack drivers in the city, they will pick you up from the side of the road as well. There's like various hand signals that we have in the city that kind of indicate what direction you're going in. And you can also tell by where they're standing on the side of the road. And so you signal for a driver to pull over. And so there's no way of knowing who's a hack because it's not legal. But if you're on the side making the signal and somebody's driving past, they'll stop to pick you up. No, there's no way of identifying them by the vehicle. But it's a huge part of mobility in Baltimore. People use it to get to work. A lot of times you'll see people signaling along major transit routes. So like if the bus isn't there, they'll kind of take whatever comes first, particularly if they're late. You'll see people with kids taking them. So it's a major part actually of mobility in the city. So yeah, so in terms of TNCs, we did see some people did say that they take Uber and Lyft to the grocery store. It was more so on your higher income levels there, and also younger, a little bit in your younger demographic. The city of Baltimore is kind of in the process of looking at, is there some way of developing a partnership and using these companies to kind of fill those gaps in the areas where they don't have good grocery store access. It's really hard to entice a new grocery store to your community, so maybe if you can't entice a grocery store, can we get people to the food? So that's one of the things they're looking at. They're also part of the online SNAP pilot. So currently, when you have food benefits, you can't actually use online shopping for your food benefits. So they've now allowed, I think, 3 states to do a pilot, with which Maryland is one of them. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes, if people take advantage of that instead of having to pay to get to the stores as well. But hacks so far say there's not much competition, and maybe it's that kind of service-oriented aspect of their industry. And then lastly, we looked at different types of, I guess, alternative ways of getting food. So your takeout services, like your Uber Eats, grocery pickup, where the food's ready for you, but you still have to get there to pick up your groceries. Your meal preps, like your Blue Aprons, and your grocery delivery services. Aside from takeout, like everybody has kind of used like your Uber Eats and your takeout services, but all those other ones, you don't see as many people taking advantage of those services, and more people are taking advantage at the higher income levels. So meal prep, that was expected, but even grocery delivery, we still see kind of a little bit more at your higher income level. And then we also segmented it by vehicle ownership as well. So a few more people who don't own a vehicle, which is in blue, say they have used takeout food services, but you can see grocery deliveries and everything else is a little bit on par or less. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at in the study. Right now, vehicle ownership and income seem to be the most important determinants. Distance to your nearest store, I think, is important when it comes to the burden, like the financial burden of getting to the store, but not so much in terms of, financial burden of getting to the store, maybe how frequently you can get to the store. I think it's also a disservice to assume that people want to go to the nearest store. Part of equity means that you have the same choices that everybody else has. And so if you're limiting to what's the store closest to you, if that store closest to you is a Save-A-Lot, maybe you want to shop at a Giant or one of your more mainstream stores, you should have that ability as well. Transit doesn't seem to be very utilized. I don't think that's where a city should be putting in a lot of their efforts in terms of transit for going to the grocery store. And informal transit in Baltimore plays a huge role in grocery store access. And so as they kind of think of innovative ways, I believe they should either incorporate these drivers who already know their customer into their plans, or at least make sure that they're not kind of destroying that industry in the city. And I believe that looking at the quality of the store with which you're able to shop at, as well as how often you're able to shop, is probably more important than like where your nearest store is located when it comes to grocery shopping. So with that, thank you. Here's my contact information. Feel free to email me or call me if you think of stuff later, and I'll open it up to any questions you may have.
Household formation, like how many kids are in
Yes.
household
Yeah, we did ask about household information. We asked for the number of adults and the number of kids in your household.
and that didn't seem to.
So we tested it we did start to test it in the decision tree model. I can't remember. It was significant in one of them. I think it was frequency of shopping trips. That household size played a part. But don't quote me on it, but I believe it was frequency.
Baltimore cultural question, but
Okay.
at least for the hack drivers, has there, do you know, been any talk from the city about like some way to legitimize that, or maybe develop like some kind of municipal
Ooh, good question. I don't believe I think the city's course of action with the hack drivers is it's a known thing. We're not going to penalize it, but it's like accepted, but not, yeah, it's like
a live and let live kind of thing?
yeah, they kind of they know it's there. They know how important it is to the city. They can't really sanction it because it's not legal, but they're also not going to penalize it either. It's kind of what's happening with those drivers in Baltimore.
So this thing about TNCs versus
Yes.
hacks have been around for a long time.
And I think they're still cheaper as well. I think the hacks are cheaper than your TNCs. Also, a lot of the hacks go where you don't have as many TNCs located. So there's those kind of equity, geographic distribution things that will kind of keep that industry alive a little bit as well.
Is there a racial?
Yeah, I mean, predominantly you see mostly people of color using hacks.
Uber and Lyft drivers and
Everybody, it's everyone. I think the TNCs, everyone kind of uses it. It's just more of the price trade-off with them.
that'd be really fascinating.
I know
See how that evolves.
it's on my radar for a study, I think.
I'm sure
Oh yeah, I mean, even for myself as not being a local, I don't know how to use the hacks. Like, I don't know what the hand signal is. I don't know what the accepted fare is for those various distances. So it's a very local, like someone has to be, you have to be shown the ropes with the hacks.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard about that in other cities.
Yeah, I mean, there's other places where, you know, like your immigrant populations may have similar services, but in terms of being like a citywide thing, I think it may be kind of unique to Baltimore. Good question. Actually, one of my students brought it to my attention. He's local to the city, and I think we were just having a conversation about. I think he was like maybe like late to class one day and was just talking about like, oh, I had to go help bring groceries home, or we were doing a grocery shopping trip, and he actually started doing some of the preliminary work as a senior project. My undergrads are like amazing students, so he first started looking at it as a senior project, and then we kind of built upon that and actually got a grant to do it further.
But grocery shopping is just fascinating.
It is, and it's so important, and it's something that if you have a car or you live close to a grocery store, you just kind of take it for granted. And if you think about, I mean, even for myself as living by myself, I'll go walk to the grocery store if I'm getting like a couple items. But even if I'm doing a major shopping trip, right, unless you have a cart or something, it's a little difficult.
But you're finding about the people don't use the closest store. That's
No.
what I've seen in my surveys.
Mm-hmm.
And in Austin, we did some qualitative follow-up, and it was really interesting to hear what people said about why they shop at the store that they do.
Yeah.
You know, it's the price of the product. Oh, it's just, I like the music.
Yeah, it's a
Or,
pleasant shopping experience. I mean, there's
pleasant.
yeah.
The parking's easy, or, I mean, it was just this whole host of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And your point about choice being a part of
Yeah, I think it's
Right.
taking advantage of, like, you should have a choice in where you can shop.
it. So when we're measuring accessibility, it's not just
There's something
about
close
distance
to you,
the
yes.
nearest, but do you have this variety, equity of having
Exactly.
So one of the things that you brought up a couple of times is trying to encourage others,
Yes.
what mechanisms do cities really have to encourage that? Because that's fundamentally.
Yeah, so like one of the reasons why we chose like the USDA or the another one is the CDFI metric for where is a food desert. There are some incentive programs that are there at the national level to kind of entice grocery stores there, but really it's economics. I was reading some study that looked at the average amount that's spent on groceries at various income levels, and kind of essentially you need to have a critical density of people to kind of balance out the budget in terms of their shopping budget. And what I think will be interesting in terms of future work is maybe their shopping budget isn't that much different if you account for cost of transportation. So if you're spending $25, $30 on transportation, that's money you can't spend on food. So I'm actually curious if some of those things that people think are huge imbalances may not be as huge if you look at the full cost of a shopping trip. But yeah, some of the economics with it. I know they've done things like trying to do like tax incentives to entice grocery stores, but it's an uphill battle.
And is Baltimore actively doing some of those things? Thinking that
I think right now what they're more concerned about is making sure stores don't close. We've had a couple closures and kind of looking at which stores are on the fringes of possibly closing. So I think that's one track is let's make sure we keep the stores that we have. And then part two is this, how can we get people to food. See one in the back and then. Off the top of my head, I can't speak to that, but we do have the data, yeah. I imagine it'll be similar trends, because one, vehicle ownership and income are correlated, so I would imagine it'd be similar.
So one of the things that I gathered from your presentation is that a lot of the little mom and pop corner stores, higher, and so I'm not going to go so far and say that like you're paying them in a bad light, but it kind of has a sense of like it's not the optimal solution to people who want to go for.
Yeah, I mean, they play a critical role in terms of food. Like one of the initiatives Baltimore City was looking at was can we infuse produce at those small grocery stores? Just based on like some of the conversations my students were having while they were administering the surveys, it sounds like a lot of people may do like a major shopping trip at your large grocery stores, but then if they need like pick up small items and do like small runs, that's when those local convenience stores and stuff play a big role in that.
And I don't know how much, like what percentage of that is like a 7-Eleven or like a CVS. But like I'm from outside of New York City area, so I have a lot of friends who live on Manhattan Island, and they love that they can just go to the local bodega,
Yeah.
whatever they need, and they have a huge sense of pride. Like, no, this is the one I go to.
And it's a mix in Baltimore. So we have like your Family Dollars, your 7-Elevens, and then you do have your local corner stores, but they're not really like a bodega necessarily, where you have still fresh produce.
Right.
In some of our international areas, like in the Latino part of town, you do see some of those sort of stores, but largely, mostly like non-perishable items, stuff that has long shelf lives at those stores. We are a pilot for Salvation Army grocery store, which is kind of interesting. I don't know about the location of where they put the Salvation Army grocery store, but it'll be interesting to see how that model plays out and if it can be implemented elsewhere. Nonprofit, so it's operated by Salvation Army. They do have a mix of like name brand and non-name brand. Smaller store, in terms of variety, but they still have all the basics. And yeah, it's pretty new, so I don't know like kind of what the results are yet or how successful it is. I think it's about a year old, but it's within walking distance of a giant grocery store, so we'll see how that goes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe we asked them like a time range of how long it takes to get to the grocery store, maybe like 5 to 10 minute increments. I haven't looked at it too closely yet, but I think time is dependent on mode choice as well. So even the people who live close, they may be spending 30 minutes getting there than those who are further away. But I haven't looked at it, but we could. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. That was wonderful.